They say the dead can't talk, but the truth is, if you spend enough time in a morgue, you start to hear them anyway. I'm not talking about ghosts moaning in the corridors or rattling chains in the dark. No, this is different. It's the whispers in your head when you're alone, the feeling that the body on your table is not entirely gone. I've worked in forensic pathology for over 15 years, and in that time, I've seen things no training manual could prepare me for. Some nights you go home, eat dinner, watch TV, and sleep like nothing happened. Other nights, the things you see and hear follow you into your dreams. And sometimes, they don't leave when you wake up. This is one of those nights. Or rather, 3 of them. The first case, the man who wouldn't lie still. It started on a quiet Thursday evening. I was the only medical examiner on shift. The morgue lights hummed softly above me, and the room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic. The body had arrived an hour earlier, a middle-aged man identified as Carl Davis. Found in his apartment, no signs of struggle, cause of death unknown. His skin was pale but not yet waxy, and there was something about the angle of his head on the gurney that made me uneasy, though I couldn't explain why. Routine procedure. I wheeled him into the autopsy room, switched on the recorder, and began. As I made the first incision along his chest, the overhead lights flickered. Not unusual. The building was old, wiring unreliable. But the flicker was followed by something else, a sound. It was faint, almost like fabric shifting. I froze, scalpel in hand. The room was silent. My eyes drifted to the man's face. His head was now angled slightly to the left. I told myself I must have moved it without noticing. I kept going. When I reached for the bone saw, I felt it again. A movement. My gloved hand rested briefly on his ribcage, and I swear I felt a subtle rise and fall, as if he were breathing. My rational brain kicked in. Residual muscle contractions, I muttered to myself. It happens sometimes. Electrical impulses can linger briefly after death. But Carl Davis had been dead for hours. I leaned closer to check for any sign of life. That's when his eyes opened. Not all the way, just enough for me to see the milky whites beneath the lids. His lips parted, and a sound like a soft exhale escaped. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the scalpel. The heart monitor in the corner was silent, of course. We weren't hooked up to any machines. My hands shook as I checked for a pulse. Nothing. Ice cold. I backed toward the door, my breath coming in shallow gasps. And then, the lights went out. The darkness was complete. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Somewhere in the blackness, something shifted. A soft thud of flesh against metal. When the emergency lights flickered on, the table was empty. My eyes scanned the room wildly until I saw him, Carl Davis, standing in the far corner, his head tilted unnaturally, his jaw hanging slack. I didn't think. I bolted for the hallway, slamming the door behind me. By the time I returned with security, the body was back on the table, lying exactly as before. No signs of movement. We locked the morgue that night. The official report says natural causes. But I will never forget those eyes opening. The second case. The woman in drawer 7. This one still keeps me awake sometimes. It happened about 2 years after the Davis incident, during a long stretch of night shifts. We had a Jane Doe, unidentified woman, mid-30s, found near the docks. Signs of severe hypothermia, but something about her features told me there was more to it. Her hair was long and black, tangled with strands of seaweed, her skin pale and waterlogged. I was exhausted and decided to leave her examination for the morning. I slid her into drawer 7, logged her in, and went to finish some paperwork. Around 3 a.m. I heard it, a slow, rhythmic tapping coming from the wall behind me. At first I thought it was the pipes, old building, noisy at night, but the sound grew louder, sharper. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the drawers. My stomach sank. I walked slowly toward them, my eyes locked on the stainless steel handles. Drawer 7 was vibrating slightly. I told myself it couldn't be what I thought. Maybe the refrigeration system was glitching. Maybe a loose hinge. Anything but what my gut already knew. The tapping stopped. I reached for the handle. And then from inside the drawer, a voice whispered my name. I froze, hand hovering over the metal. The whisper came again, clearer this time. Daniel! I yanked the drawer open. She was lying there exactly as I'd left her, except her eyes were open, fixed directly on mine. Her lips curled into the faintest smile, and water dripped from her hair onto the sheet beneath her. I stumbled back, my knees hitting the counter behind me. She sat up in one slow, deliberate movement, her gaze never leaving mine. Before I could move, she swung her legs over the edge and stepped onto the floor. Her bare feet left wet footprints as she moved toward me. I scrambled for the door, but she was suddenly there, inches from my face. The air smelled like salt and decay. She leaned in, her voice a low hiss. It's cold down there. Come see. And then, just like that, she was gone. No sound, no trace, just an empty space where she'd stood. When I looked back at the drawer, it was closed again. I don't remember leaving the morgue that night. I just remember waking up in my car the next morning, the keys still in the ignition, my clothes damp with seawater. The third case, the child in the morgue. This is the one I never talk about to anyone outside my field. It's the kind of thing that makes you question reality. A small body was brought in one winter morning, 8-year-old boy, car accident. The EMTs said he was gone on the scene, no chance of resuscitation. His name was Ethan. Children are the hardest cases. You learn to build walls in this job, but nothing can prepare you for the stillness of a child. I tried to focus on the procedure, to shut out the personal thoughts. Halfway through the examination, I felt it, that sensation of being watched. I looked up, and he was sitting on the table. Not lying. Sitting, legs dangling over the edge, swinging slowly. His head was tilted and his eyes were impossibly wide. Can I go home now? He asked softly. My throat went dry. Ethan, you're... I couldn't say it. He smiled faintly. They're waiting for you. Who? I whispered. He pointed to the far corner of the room. I turned, but there was nothing there, just shadows. When I looked back, the table was empty again. I finished the autopsy in silence, my hands numb. But when I pulled the sheet over his face, I heard it, his voice, right next to my ear. See you soon. Those were just 3 nights in a career full of them. Nights where logic fails and you start to wonder if the morgue really is just a room for the dead, or a doorway to something else. And sometimes, I think about that whisper in the dark. Maybe, one day, I will see them soon. The whispers had stopped. The fluorescent hum of the morgue returned to its usual, almost comforting monotony. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something in the room, something in me. For weeks after Ethan's case, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder in the lab, expecting to see a small silhouette in the corner. Every time I opened a drawer, part of me braced for the cold touch of a hand reaching out. In this line of work, you tell yourself it's all in your head. But deep down you know, sometimes it isn't. That's when the 4th case happened. The 4th case, the man in the hallway. It was a stormy night, the kind where the wind rattles the window panes and the rain hits like pebbles against the glass. I was on another solo shift doing paperwork, in the office next to the autopsy room. The building felt unusually still. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Heavy. I assumed it was security making rounds, but the steps stopped right outside my office door. I waited for a knock. Nothing. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty, except for a trail of wet footprints leading away toward the refrigeration units. I followed them. They stopped at drawer 12. Inside was a man in his late 40s, Edward Lambert, cardiac arrest. He'd been brought in earlier that evening. His clothes were still damp from the rain, his hair matted. I checked the temperature gauge. Normal. The body was cold. But the wet footprints on the floor, they hadn't been there before. I leaned closer to examine his face. That's when I saw it. Water trickling from the corner of his eye, like a tear. I stepped back, my stomach knotting. And then, in one smooth motion, his head turned toward me. His mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, as if his jaw were unhinging. From inside that mouth, a voice that wasn't his spoke. "They're coming for you, Daniel." The lights flickered, and the drawer slammed shut so hard the metal shook. I stumbled backward into the wall, my breathing ragged. When I opened the drawer again, he was still lying there, mouth closed, face serene. No sign of moisture, no footprints. I didn't sleep that night. The fifth case, the girl in the mirror. It was months later, and I had started telling myself maybe the strange occurrences were behind me. The human brain, after all, has a way of playing tricks when you're surrounded by death, day after day. Then came the girl in the mirror. She was a teenager, maybe 16, with auburn hair and a scattering of freckles across her nose. Her name was Lily, a suspected overdose. I was halfway through the external examination when I caught movement in the stainless steel cabinet door across the room. It reflected just enough to show shapes and outlines. I saw her in it, not lying on the table, but standing right behind me. My breath caught. I turned around. The room was empty. When I looked back at the reflection, she was still there, closer now. Her lips moved, but no sound came. I stepped toward the cabinet, my eyes locked on hers in the reflection. She reached out a hand toward me, through the reflection, not the air in front of me. Her fingers brushed the inside of the mirrored surface as though it were glass between us. A faint voice filled the room, not from the mirror, but from everywhere at once. "Help me." And then the reflection changed. It wasn't Lily anymore. It was me. But not as I was. My reflection had dark, sunken eyes and blood trickling from my mouth. The lights buzzed violently, and the reflection shattered into 1,000 pieces without the glass breaking. I left the room. I didn't go back until morning. The sixth case, the coffin delivery one, rainy afternoon, a delivery came in. Unusual, because it wasn't from the coroner's van. A plain, unmarked wooden coffin. No paperwork, no ID. The driver said it was a special transfer from a neighboring county and left before I could ask questions. Inside was a man dressed in an old-fashioned black suit, his hands folded neatly over his chest. His skin was gray, stretched tight over his bones. When I checked the log, there was no record of any such transfer. I decided to store him until I could sort it out. But when I came back an hour later, the coffin was empty. I searched the entire morgue, every room, every hallway. Nothing. The next morning, the coffin was back in place, sealed shut. Inside was the same man, except now his hands weren't folded. They were pressed flat against the inside of the lid, as if he'd been trying to push it open. The seventh case. The voice in the vent. The ventilation system in the morgue is old and loud. You stop hearing the hum after a while. But one night the sound changed. It wasn't a hum anymore, it was a whisper. I leaned close to the vent above my desk. The words were faint, almost like a chant. Then I realized it wasn't one voice. It was many, overlapping, murmuring in different tones. I caught fragments. "Behind you. Open the door. We're waiting." When I pulled back, I saw something move behind the grate. Long, pale fingers curling through the slats, reaching for me. And that was when I finally started to believe the morgue wasn't just a workplace. It was a threshold. That realization, threshold, wouldn't leave my mind. It explained too much, and not nearly enough. If this place was some kind of border between the living and whatever came next, then maybe the dead didn't always cross over quietly. Maybe some of them lingered. Maybe some came back. I tried to keep working as if nothing had changed. The dead still needed processing, and my report still had to be filed. But I stopped doing night shifts alone, or at least I tried. It was a Wednesday evening when they called me in for an urgent case. The county coroner's office had been overwhelmed after a multi-vehicle accident, and we were the only facility with space left. The 8th case, the woman in red. When I unzipped the first body bag, I froze. The woman inside wasn't dressed in a hospital gown or street clothes. She was wearing a vivid red dress, satin, the kind you'd see at a formal dinner or a gala. Her hair was styled, makeup perfect. According to the paramedics, she had been found on the roadside, no ID, no vehicle in sight. There was something about her face, peaceful, almost smiling, like she was dreaming. I checked for external injuries, nothing. But when I rolled her over, I found a thin line down her spine, perfectly straight, perfectly healed. Surgical, but not fresh. I was noting this when the overhead lights dimmed slightly. I didn't notice at first. What I did notice was that the red of her dress seemed brighter, almost glowing. Then her head turned. Not fully, just enough for her eyes to meet mine. They weren't dead eyes. They were sharp, alive, and locked on me. Her lips parted and she whispered something so softly I almost thought I imagined it. "You can't bury me." The next moment, her eyes were closed again, and she was still. I backed away, every hair on my arm standing up. Later, when I returned to prepare her for refrigeration, she was gone. The 9th case, the laughing man. Another week passed. The storms outside seemed constant now, rain battering the roof, thunder rattling the walls. I was used to the creaks and groans of the building, but that night I heard something new. Laughter. It was faint, far away, but clear. A man's voice, low and mocking. It echoed from the cold storage room. I opened the door, the air biting at my face, and stepped inside. The laughter stopped. I checked the drawers. Nothing unusual. But as I turned to leave, I saw condensation forming on the metal wall. Words. Stay. The letters dripped like they were written in breath on glass. I left the door open that night. The 10th case. The autopsy that wouldn't end. Her name was Margaret Kell. Official cause of death, unknown. I began the examination at 10:32 a.m. The next thing I remember, I was still standing over her at 3 p.m. My tools were scattered, my gloves were gone, and my notes were blank. I had no memory of what I'd done in those missing hours. When I finally worked up the nerve to check the body again, I found something carved into her left arm, not with a scalpel, something sharper, deeper. 4 words. I borrowed your time. After that, I started dreaming about the morgue even when I wasn't there. The hall stretched on forever, the drawers lined with faces that stared when I passed. And always, somewhere in the distance, the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps. I knew the dreams were more than dreams when I woke up one morning with a small metal toe tag in my hand. It was blank. The 11th case, the child's drawer. There's one drawer in the far corner of the refrigeration unit we don't use unless absolutely necessary. Drawer 14. It's smaller than the others, built for pediatric cases. One evening, I heard knocking from inside it. It started slow, tap, 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 then faster, frantic. When I opened it, it was empty. Just the cold, the stainless steel, and the faint scent of flowers. The knocking started again. This time, it was coming from behind me. From that night forward, I stopped telling myself these were isolated incidents. I stopped pretending the morgue was just a job. It wasn't a job anymore. It was an invitation. After the night of drawer 14, I stopped working in silence. I kept the radio on low, just enough to break the stillness, because it was the stillness that let them in. Or so I thought. The 12th case. The room that wasn't there. It started as a mistake. I'd gone to retrieve a file from the basement archives, following the same narrow hallway I'd walked 100 times. But that night, there was a door at the end of it, a door I'd never seen before. It was painted the same dull gray as the walls, unmarked, unlit. I told myself it must have been a storage closet I'd just never noticed. But when I opened it, the air that rushed out was warm and damp, carrying the smell of earth, freshly turned soil. The room beyond was not part of the morgue. The walls were rough stone, the ceiling low, and in the center a single wooden table. On it lay a body I didn't recognize. It was me. Not breathing, not moving, just lying there, eyes closed. I stumbled back, but the door slammed shut behind me. The light above flickered once, and then I heard the sound of metal drawers sliding open, one by one, all around me in the dark. Hands, cold, strong, grabbed my arms from behind. A voice I couldn't place whispered into my ear, "You've been here longer than you think." When the lights came back, I was standing in the hallway again, file in hand. The door was gone. The 13th case, the unclaimed. Every morgue has them, the unclaimed bodies. People who die without family, without friends, without anyone to say their name out loud again. We keep them until the law allows us to release them for burial or cremation. One night, there were 12. The next morning, there were 13. The 13th was a man in a tattered hospital gown, his skin pale, almost translucent. There was no record of his arrival, no paperwork. I didn't even realize I was staring at him until his eyes opened. They were pitch black. "You're doing good work," he said, his voice low and steady. "You keep them here with you. That's what they want." I turned to run, but my legs didn't move. My body wasn't mine. "They'll keep you too when it's time." The next thing I knew, I was alone again, the drawer sealed. But when I checked the log, there was no 13th body listed. The 14th case, the lantern. It was near closing when the lights went out completely. Not a flicker, just gone. I found my flashlight and headed toward the breaker room, but halfway there, I saw a dim, golden glow ahead. A figure stood in the middle of the hallway, holding an old-fashioned lantern. The glass was cracked, the flame inside struggling. I couldn't see the figure's face. It was hidden beneath a hood. The flame inside the lantern flared, and in that light, I saw the faces of every body I'd ever worked on. They were pressed against the glass from the inside, their mouths moving soundlessly. The figure lifted the lantern higher, and suddenly, I could hear them. All of them. Calling my name. The figure stepped toward me, the flame growing brighter. My flashlight died in my hand, plunging everything else into darkness. The voices grew louder, overlapping, until they weren't voices anymore. They were screams. The lantern's light hit my eyes, and for a moment, I couldn't see anything at all. When my vision cleared, I was no longer in the hallway. I was standing in the middle of the cold storage room, every single drawer hanging open, and from the far end of the room, something was crawling toward me. Not walking, crawling, fast. And that is where the next part begins. It moved in jerks, its limbs bending in ways they shouldn't, scraping against the cold tile as it dragged itself forward. The smell hit me first, sweet, rotten, clinging to the air like a wet cloth pressed over my face. I tried to back away, but the wall was already against my spine. My breath came in shallow bursts, loud in the silence. The thing's head lifted. It was a woman's face, or it had been once. The skin was stretched too tight. The lips split wide into something that wasn't a smile. Her eyes were gone. In their place, two black pits that seemed to pull the light out of the room. Her voice was wrong. Too many tones at once, like a chorus speaking from a single mouth. "We've been waiting for you." She lunged. I braced for impact, but instead of hitting me, she passed through me. Cold, burning cold, surged through my chest and my legs buckled. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the metal table in the center of the room. My wrists and ankles were strapped down. Standing above me were three figures. They wore the same morgue scrubs I did, but their faces were pale, waxy, dead. One of them leaned close, the smell of decay rolling off his skin. "Do you understand now?" he whispered. "You don't work here. You never did. You're one of us." I shook my head, heart pounding, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Had been wrong for a long time. The lights in the room began to flicker, and with each flash, the figures changed. For a second, they were corpses. Then strangers I'd never seen. Then the faces of people I'd autopsied over the years. And then, just for a heartbeat, they were all me. Every single one. A sharp pain shot through my chest. I looked down and saw a tag hanging from my toe. The blank tag. The room darkened again, and somewhere in the shadows, I heard the sound of metal drawers sliding closed. 1, 2, 3. Until the last drawer shut with a deep, final thunk. The cold storage door opened, flooding the room with a pale, unnatural light. The figure holding the lantern stepped inside. The flame inside the cracked glass burned white now, and the faces trapped in it were silent, watching. The hooded figure set the lantern on the table beside me, leaned close enough for me to feel the weight of their presence, and said, "It's time to make room." Then, without warning, the straps around my wrists and ankles snapped open. I sat up, too quickly, and the room was empty. No lantern, no figures, no smell of rot, just the hum of the refrigeration units. For a moment, I almost believed it had been another dream, until I looked at the stainless steel wall and saw my reflection, lying down, eyes closed, tag still on my toe. They say the dead don't feel cold, but I do, every day. This is why I keep the lights on in the morgue, even when I'm alone, because I know that when they finally go out, for good, I won't be turning them back on.